You want your web page to work across different platforms. Specifically, talking about a big issue is it working across mobile and desktop and laptop. And let's take a look at what we did. We followed a few principles. We did everything in terms of percentages instead of absolute number of pixels, even image sizes. What else did we do? Can't remember. I think that's a big part of it. The other part is we use media queries then to apply different style sheets to in different circumstances. So let's take a look at the example we had last time and play with it a little bit. This is definitely one of those days where you do not want to get out of bed. Oh, joy. I heard weather forecasters use a bad word. Well, what most people consider a bad word, that we might get some snow, flurries. I like snow. I don't know. I know. Don't hate me. I thought, yeah, the weekend, yeah.
It's supposed to be just like a light.
Right, yeah. My daughter lives in Minnesota, and they probably have like 3 feet already. Yeah. It's like any time I would see like on the news that we're getting snow, like you take what we have and like quadruple it, and that's what they would get. Yeah. Also, the cold, drizzly rain I do not like either. Nice, fluffy snow is nice. All right, so here is the example we had last time to review. And the way it's set up, we had the page look like this. As the page gets smaller, the layout of the page changes. Now again, keep in mind that I do things to demonstrate, to make sure it's like really obvious that it changes. So, this is a pretty plain version. Although as a general rule, you do want things to look plain. For the mobile version. You typically want one column instead of multiple columns, and so on. All right, so yeah, this is sort of plain, but that's kind of a good thing. And the way that this is accomplished is you have 2 style sheets. Oh, sorry. You have 2 style sheets, one of which is applied all the time. So if you notice the one that is labeled that is called main.css, there's no media query on that. So everyone gets this style sheet. This style sheet only happens when you're on a computer screen and your width is at least 800 pixels. So narrower than 800 pixels, you will collapse and I'm sorry, wider than 800 pixels and a computer screen, you will also get this style sheet. So the idea is that everyone gets the basic style sheet. And then on a wider monitor, on a computer screen that's at least 800 pixels, you will get these additional changes to it. And remember, these changes overrule what's in the first style sheet simply by the position. This is after that one. So whatever's in here overrules this. So if we, for example, flip these around, we get sort of a mix between those. We still get some of the things from this one, the things that are in this one that aren't in this one. But the things that are in both, by switching the order, the second one overrules. All right? So the position, people have asked in class, like, does the position of CSS matters? Here's one case where it does. When you have multiple CSS files, the later one will overrule the earlier one if both of them apply. But again, the second style sheet, notice has a media query on it, which means it doesn't apply all the time. It only applies in this situation, whereas the screen's at least, it's a computer screen that's at least 800 pixels wide. Yes?
Well, like if you have multiple CSS files, the more specific the CSS rule will apply to the element.
No. No. It is literally the order. Because if you notice, when I reverse the order of these, this is the way it's supposed to look, like this. All right? With the Star Wars background. But if I switch the order of these, then I get that. What's the difference? The difference is now main is after desktop. So in desktop, I declared the background to look like this.
I'm talking about like more specific selector. Like if you just
Yeah, that's true.
you just have like, for example, image in there. The main one is it will be overruled by section.
Right, right. That's just a basic function of CSS. You're right about that. The more specific the selector is, it takes precedence over a less specific selector. But in this case, my focus is on when you have multiple style sheets, which one overrules if they have the same selector.
Yeah.
And that is determined strictly by the sequence of them. All right, that's what I want to make sure is clear here. All right. So we found two ways to do this. One way was like this, where we have a CSS, separate CSS file for each of the different screen resolutions. You can also combine it into one CSS file and use your media queries inside of that, which is what we have here. All right. I still have the two CSS files, but I can actually get rid of this one. Because inside main, there are sort of embedded media queries. So in other words, there's body that applies. There's also body down here embedded within a media query. And I can put those side by side if you want. So you see, this is the body. That everyone gets initially. This one will overrule for the width being at least 800 pixels. All right, so it's built right in. The media query is built right in. Just two different ways to do it. And there's reasons for doing both. It's kind of nice to have a whole style sheet that you can plug in or plug out. But it's also nice that you can see everything all at once here. So, you know, 6 of one, half dozen the other. If I was skinning my site, I might use two different style sheets. By skinning, I mean having the user have the option of which CSS file to use. You know, you may have seen some sites where you can customize your page. That might be easier to do with two CSS files. But this is nice because you can see everything at once. Yes?
So I do know, like, on some sites, if you're looking at on the mobile version, you can, like, click on the view the desktop version.
Yes.
Would that be done with two CSS files?
That's a good question. That could be done a couple different ways. Responsive design is just one of the techniques that you can use to make your page work in a mobile environment. There's actually a couple other ones. All right. One of them involves having server-side code that that handles this. We haven't talked about server-side scripting in this class. That's where you have a program written on the web server that doesn't just deliver HTML, but actually runs a program to prepare the HTML. So one way you could do it is with that. Another way you can do it is you can actually have two different websites. You can have just two sets of HTML code. That's effective if you really want different content on each. Like if you really want the mobile version to be drastically different than the desktop version, which is a case in some instances. And if you did that, then the link that says view full site would just be a link to the full version of the site. A lot of times you see that, like if you go to a web page and like I can't think of an example, so I'll use eBay. The regular website would be like www.ebay.com, and the mobile website would be ebay.com. When you have a case like that, there's literally two different files, two different sets of web pages that you switch between. But yeah, that's one of the ways. You'd have a little piece of JavaScript that would say, hey, I don't care what the media query says, apply this style sheet. All right, so you could do it a few different ways. All right, you don't have to have just two breakpoints. All right, you could actually have a third breakpoint. So for example, I'll make this full version if it's 1,000 pixels. All right, with the full Star Wars background. I could make a, well, let's leave that at 800. Let's put this in a media query, though, that says if it's at least 600, it gets this. And I can have just a very basic, if someone's coming to this with a flip phone or something, a very small device. So if I did that, the full version would look like this. As I make it smaller, it switches to this. After I make it smaller still, it switches to that. Okay? So you can have multiple breakpoints. It's not just two. A lot of times I talk about mobile versus desktop, but really with media queries you can put in multiple breakpoints. So you could have a smartphone behave differently than like a basic flip phone, just by putting a different breakpoint in. And you might do something where you had a different view, change the column sizes or whatever. Oh, I didn't finish this one last time. I need to put a media query around this one. So I'll put a minimum width of 800 pixels to get this stuff. With the wide resolution, we have three columns. Here we have one column. And then here we have an even planar. I could even make this one, I could put a media query in to say if the width is 600, maybe make it so that there's two columns. Try this. Okay. So we have the full version. Which again I should put above this. All right? Because the order matters if you're using media queries. We have a three-column version at this width. We go down to this width. We get a two-column version. And then if we make it even smaller, we get a one-column version. All right? So that's a nice, with these media queries, you can really customize the page to really look different on each device. Remember, the goal isn't to make the page look identical on each device. That's not really practical, right? Because you just don't have as much space on a mobile device as you have on a desktop device. So if you tried to make it look identical, you're going to run into difficulties. Not to mention the fact that besides the size being smaller, the shape of a device is different, especially if you're looking at portrait mode. So if you're looking at your phone like this in portrait mode, it's longer than it is wide. Now, if you turn it, it's wider than it's long, but the typical computer screen is always going to be wider than it is tall. So you want your page to look good in portrait mode, in landscape mode, on the mobile, and on a computer screen. All right? But when I say it needs to look good, it doesn't need to look identical in all those situations. All right? That's one thing that drives some graphic designers mad, all right? Because graphic designers are used to having things that look exactly a certain way, and it stays that way. Well, that's easy to do if you're only designing for a very fixed medium. If you're designing a magazine cover, every copy of that magazine is going to have an identical looking cover, right? because it's only so big. It's always that big, and everyone's going to get the exact same look. Whereas with a web page, people are going to be viewing it in a different manner. And therefore, it's a challenge to try to make it look identical, and it's a challenge not worth taking, all right? Because you want to take advantage of the specific layout that the person's viewing it. You want it to change depending on if you're viewing it on a small portrait device versus a large landscape device. And that's what these media queries provide. Okay? Questions about this? So it would be a good idea from here on out for you to make sure all your pages are responsive, starting with probably this lab, but if you didn't do it for this lab, going forward. So you should have at least 2 different breakpoints. These are called breakpoints, by the way, because things change at these particular points of time. All right? You get a different look. Questions about this? All right. Let me verify what the next topic is. Mobile web development, we covered that one. What I ought to do one of these days when I'm feeling tired is I ought to come in and just play one of my lectures from last semester, and you would get a video of a video. And then the next semester I could do a video of that. I'm losing my mind clearly. Yep, I was right. Web accessibility. All right. What does web accessibility mean? It means something very specific. It's a little different than cross-browser compatibility. Cross-browser compatibility or platform compatibility means that your page is going to look good, again, not identical, but good across different platforms. And responsive design is that it's going to look good, not identical, but good at different screen sizes. What does web accessibility, though, mean? Right. Web accessibility is where your page is functional for people regardless of their abilities or disabilities. Okay, that's what we mean by accessibility. It's not quite the same as usability. Usability is another word that is similar to accessibility, but usability means it's easy for people to use. Accessibility means that it's functional and it's easy for people to use regardless of their abilities or disabilities. All right? Now, accessibility is actually a very important topic. Here at the college, we're working hard to make all our resources accessible. All right? There is sort of the moral argument for doing it, right? Who wants to be, who wants to exclude someone from accessing the information of your site? You would never you'd never create a physical store, for example, that someone with a wheelchair couldn't get into, right? Or couldn't work their way around. So why would you do that with a website? Now, wheelchairs aren't necessarily relevant when you come for accessing information on the web. But there are a list of disabilities that are relevant when it comes to accessing information on the web. All right? A lot of people tend to think, when we talk about accessibility, that you're talking about developing websites for people that are blind. Because the web is such a visual medium, all right, that people think of, well, how does someone that can't see access information? And you made a good point that they use a piece of software called a screen reader. And at some point, I plan on demonstrating the way a screen reader works. And it may seem awkward to you, but when you consider if that's your only alternative, you make it work, right? But as web developers, we want to do what we can to remove obstacles from people using screen readers and other assistive technologies. All right? There's sort of a two-pronged approach for allowing people with different abilities and disabilities accessing the web. One of them is what is called assistive technologies. And one of them is the principles of universal design. If you think about it, this exists in the real world as well, in the physical world. An example of an assistive technology would be a wheelchair, right? So a wheelchair is a piece of technology that allows someone that can't walk to move around campus, let's say. However, if this assistive technology isn't taken into account when you're designing, bad design can beat it. So for example, if there were no elevators in this building, as just one example, that would be a case where someone could have a wheelchair, it's still not going to help them get upstairs. All right? Still not going to help them get upstairs. Or in the courtyard, you know, if there were no wheelchair ramps where someone could run their wheelchair up or down it, then again, they could have that assistive technology all that they want, but it still wouldn't be of benefit. There's similar things when we talk about web design as well. We want to put stuff in our page that supports the assistive technology and doesn't defeat it. All right? What are some pieces of assistive technology that exist for web pages and using computers in general? The one that I mentioned is the screen reader. Now, there's a screen reader built into Microsoft Windows. It's not particularly a good one, all right? But we can view it and listen to it and get a taste of the experience of what it would be like to access a web page using a screen reader. So let's go and let's make sure our volume is up. I don't know, can you hear that? There. All right. We go under Control Panel. There is a choice for, don't tell me, Ease of Access Center.
Always scan this section.
Okay, that's an example of a screen reader. All right, it actually read the page. The screen reader is not the only piece of assistive technology. A screen magnifier is one. I am
Start magnifier.
I am a DJ sometimes at WOBC in Oberlin.
Start narrator.
And one of the, let me turn the volume off till we're ready for it. One of the DJs that came after me during the summer had very poor eyesight. I mean, even like way worse than mine. He's legally blind, but he can see a little bit, all right? So he would use a screen magnifier. So let's say we're on a web page. Just pick any web page. Let's go to Stocker Art Center. The magnifier broke the computer. No, the computer is not supposed to freeze. Let's try to use a keyboard for this. Yeah. Control Shift Escape. Yeah. Yeah. Oh, and look, it even. Well, that's not very accessible, is it? Yeah, that would really be horrible. That would keep you from using this. Now, I don't know if that's a Windows 10 problem, if that is something to do with the way this machine is configured, or what. But that's a case of, if that went wrong, you know, you're defeated. That assistive technology just doesn't work, and you're not able to access it. No ramps or elevators, yeah. Or, yeah, broken wheelchair or something. I don't know. I don't know what the analogy would be. All right. Yeah, that would be a wheelchair ramp.
I think it's a sinkhole in the wheelchair.
Yeah, I was going to say made of mud, but or sinkhole's even better. Yeah. Or the elevator broke down, or. That's true. I've had more technical difficulties this semester than not even this class per se. This is one of them, but just issues with versions of software. I have a situation where I teach a University of Akron class, and I think it needs different Java. Different applications need different versions of Java, and I have no idea how we're going to do this on one machine. So it should be an interesting class later today. All right. Updates are available. Maybe the updates are to fix the magnifier, I hope. Possibly, right. Right. So let's go back there. And we'll try take two. Fortunately,
always scan this section.
Okay, I'm going to click on Set Up High Contrast. And you can turn on or turn off when Alt Left Shift Print Screen. So Alt Left Shift Print Screen. All right. Yeah, that's awful. But you can actually configure it if you want. I do believe, yeah, adjust the color and transparency. What would the use of this be? When would this possibly be effective? Light sensitivity, that's possible. Anything else? Well, that's what this is, right? Except it's for the whole computer. It's not for a given application. Okay, now how do you turn that off?
Always scan this section.
Oh yeah, I hit the wrong button. There we go. All right, there we go. Okay, sort of, yeah.
Always scan this section.
Keep in mind, again, these are like the off-the-shelf things. People that typically have disabilities would probably purchase better versions of these things. This is like what you get out of the box, you know.
Start magnifier.
On-screen keyboard.
On-screen keyboard.
Save me here. All right, what this is this allows you to use the mouse instead of the keyboard to type. So if I want to go to Google, www.google, what might this be good for? Well, your keyboard's busted. That's not really an accessibility issue. But yeah, that's true. In a pinch, you could use it for that.
I've used it in a bit.
Okay. Yeah.
Maybe you're, maybe if you're like paralyzed in your hands and not really dexterous enough to use a keyboard.
Exactly.
But enough that you can still use the mouse.
Exactly. If you had some sort of neurological issue where your motor skills were off, where you couldn't have that. I had a student years ago in my 121 class that had that very situation, and they were not able to type on a keyboard because they didn't have the motor skills to do that due to some, I don't remember precisely what their condition was, but they were able to use the on-screen keyboard to do that. So that's an example of doing that. Now the flip side, it's not really assistive technology, but keyboard shortcuts also can be an accessible issue, right? So instead of using the mouse to click on something, you can use a keyboard shortcut. So it works both ways, all right? Use the mouse instead of the keyboard, use the keyboard instead of the mouse, all right? That's one thing that we're going to see as a common theme here. The notion of universal design, which I talked about a few minutes ago, one of the ideas involves providing alternatives to people, all right? So, using the mouse or using keyboard shortcuts, that's an alternative, all right? Using, listening to a video, or listening to an audio clip or a video, or reading a transcript. Those are alternatives. And the notion of universal design says, if we provide alternatives, we are helping people with disabilities, but we're also helping other people as well under certain circumstances. A great example you guys gave is the fact that if your keyboard's broke, you could use the on-screen keyboard. That's not what it was designed for, right? It was designed for people with motor control issues, but guess what? Under some circumstances, that could help you even if you didn't have that disability. When could a transcript of an audio or video clip help you even if you didn't have an issue hearing? There's a lot of noise going around, right? You're in a noisy place and you're trying to access some content. Another example. Speakers are broke. Or like in our lab. Well, I don't think we have speakers in our lab. You don't have a headphone jack. All right? Other thing that I would think of is sometimes, like, especially like with news articles, if there's a video, I will want to read the transcript of it because I can read the transcript, I can scan it like really quickly and see if it's something I'm interested in or not. And if I'm interested, then maybe I'll watch the whole video clip. But if it doesn't seem interesting, then I'll skip it. All right? So that's universal design. All right? Something that may be put in for accessibility reasons has other benefits as well. All right? So this is sort of the world that we're in. We have assistive technologies, but we have to design with that in mind. And the designs we give can benefit people that need those things for accessibility reasons, but it can also, in some cases, benefit people that don't have those disabilities. Like I said before, reading a transcript might be your preference, even though you can hear. All right? At the very least, the assistive technology won't get in the way of people that don't have the disability issue. An example of that is the Braille outside of the classroom, right? The number of the room, I'm pretty sure, they are in most buildings here, is written in Braille. How many of you realize that? Yeah, maybe you saw it, maybe you didn't, right? That's the thing. Did it bother you that it was there? Did it get in your way of knowing what room this was? No. If you don't need it, you just overlook it. You might not even notice it. So with accessibility, the stuff that we do will either help people that don't have that accessibility under certain circumstances, or at the very least, it won't bother you. And there's analogies to the real world too, right? I'm not confined to a wheelchair, but I have pain in my hip. So sometimes I take the elevator, all right? So yeah, I could go up the steps. Actually, it'd probably be good for me to go up the steps, right? Maybe I wouldn't have the hip pain if I exercised more. But I can use that even though I don't have the disability. Or if I was carrying something heavy and going up the steps was difficult. Or if I had a push cart, like the old audio-visual cart, so I was pushing stuff around on a wheeled cart. That might be easier to take up there. No different in a web environment. Let's document some of the different disabilities that are relevant for the web. Before we do that, though, let's look at the narrator. We've gotten a taste of that already.
Start narrator.
I'm going to
Starting narrator dialog. OK. Button. Alt plus O. Heads up. Narrator keyboard changes. We've updated the narrator keyboard layout so it more closely matches the experience you may have had with other screen readers. If you want narrator to tell you what commands are associated with the keys you're pressing, you can turn on input learning by pressing caps lock +1. To turn it off, press caps lock +1 twice. To learn more, press Ctrl plus Windows logo key and to open your narrator settings and access the online user guide.
Now, someone with a screen reader, someone using a screen reader to narrate the pages is not going to be using the mouse, correct? So this is where they will be using the keyboard for an alternative. A bunch of years ago now, I had a summer fellowship at NASA, and my office mate was a high school kid that was blind, and she used a screen reader to do everything, and it really was amazing. And her supervisor was an engineer at NASA who was also blind, and she said, if you ever want to get the experience of using a screen reader, turn off your monitor and don't use the mouse. Right? Because you use the tab key to move around things.
Don't show again checkbox unchecked, Alt plus D. Turn off narrator, button, Alt plus T. OK, button, Alt plus O. Space, ease of access center, narrator window. Narrator heading level 1, welcome to narrator. This is narrator home, where you can get help, access your settings, and learn about new features. Narrator is a screen reader that describes Google, Google Chrome pane, Google, search, combo edit, scan off. H. T. M. L. Search by voice, button, scan, Google search, button. Google tab item, HTML, Google search, heading level 1, space, HTML, Google search has finished loading. Link, skip to main content.
Skip the main content, you'll see a lot of times with a narrator. What that allows you to do is this navigation up here. On most websites, that's the same on every single page, right? If you were accessing this with a screen reader, you wouldn't want the narrator to read you that navigation on every single page that you visited. People that can see, just ignore it if they don't need it. If I'm not interested in the navigation, I just look down at the other part of the screen. But if the narrator is narrating it, you can't do that. So I'm going to hit space, and that skipped to the content.
Link, HTML, Hypertext Markup Language MDN https://developer.mozilla.org enus docs web HTML. Link, feedback. Link, about featured snippets. Link, HTML tutorial, W3 Schools https://www.w3schools.com HTML.
Resource.
Document. HTML tutorial. Link, w3schools.com. Has finished loading. Link, home. Has finished loading. Link, HTML. Has finished. Link, CSS. Has finished loading. Link, SQL. Has finished loading. Has finished loading.
Not really sure what is finished loading, why it's telling us that over and over again. But we can go and we can use the keyboard to navigate around and select it.
Interesting how the narrator says SQL instead of SQL.
It is. I was happy how it pronounced Mozilla too, because I had no idea how it was going to pronounce Mozilla. All right, but it did seem to do that. Every once in a while you get, I know even like with GPS you get a goofy pronunciation. I remember like driving in Cleveland, it always pronounced Euclid wrong, like Euclid or something like that. All right, what we're going to do next time, now that we sort of introduced this topic.
Disabled. Exiting narrator.
Now that we've sort of introduced this topic, next time what we're going to do is we're going to talk about the different disabilities that can affect your web experience, because it is more than just being blind. All right, that's sort of the obvious one. Motor control, we talked about. Hearing. And there's a number of other issues that can come into play. Then we're going to talk about techniques we can take to assist people. Not with assistive technology, some other people build that, but how we could write pages that allow people to use their assistive technology to access the site, and don't provide or don't pose a burden for people that don't have the disabilities or aren't using the assistive technology. And then we'll come up with some principles for that. So that's what we'll cover next week. Any questions? All right, we'll see you up in lab.
Actually,
Yeah.
is it okay if we use people with disabilities as user personas?
Absolutely. That is not just okay, that is a great idea. The question was, would it be okay to have people with disabilities as a user persona? Absolutely. And if there was something specific about your site that may even come into play to a greater degree, if that makes sense. I'll give you for an example. If you were a school for the blind, all right, obviously you'd want to make sure, you want your site to be accessible for people with vision problems regardless, but if you're a school for blind, then yeah, that's a real important persona, because chances are there's a higher than normal chance that your population of users will include people of that category. Absolutely. Or like a wheelchair company, So yeah, that's a great idea to include that as a persona, either as a separate persona or part of another persona. All right, other questions? All right, we'll see you up in lab.